Hi, everyone. We're just going to give folks a few moments to trickle in. Meanwhile, we love getting a sense of who our audience is. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen asking you for your role. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started, and we are very excited to have you all join us today to talk about the topic of illustrating ROI to your leadership team, specifically with workforce management. And after hearing from a number of folks, the challenge of bridging that gap and translating insights, especially to folks not as familiar with workforce management, we knew that this was a really important topic for you all today, especially with the current economic backdrop. My name is Valerie, and I'm on the product marketing team here at Assembled. And in my past life, I was doing customer success. So it's always great to see a number of familiar folks and meet some new ones. I'll pass it along to my colleague Adrian to introduce himself.
Hi there, I'm Adrian. I am the workforce manager on our solutions team here. Probably a lot of you have heard this, but in my past life, I've done workforce management for T-Mobile, like every role they had, helped build out the workforce management entire program at Stripe, done some time at AWS as well. And now I'm here helping to educate more on the workforce side because it's pretty complicated out there. And Sam, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Hey, everybody. I'm Sam, and I'm one of our product education specialists here at Assemble. In my most recent prior life, I used to be on the workforce team over at Imperfect Foods, doing all of their scheduling, planning, and analytics using Assembled, which is actually how I met the team and came over to this side of the Zoom camera, though I think a lot of folks know that story by now. And I'm excited to pair with everyone here today to dive in on all of this good ROI stuff. So really excited to get this party started.
Woohoo! And a few housekeeping items for some folks. So for Q&A, if you all could please use the bottom right-hand button on your screen, that would be great. So then we can get to your questions in a timely manner. We'll also be distributing the recording promptly after the session through email. All right, I will send it over to Adrian to kick us off with the agenda here.
Thanks, Val. So we've got a couple things on the agenda here. They do get a little meaty as we dive into these. So we're just going to cover the three main areas today. The first one we're going to go over is cost savings that you can see from adherence gains. I like this one a lot. There's a lot of reasons why I like this one a lot that we'll dive into. And then Sam's going to take us through some cost savings and ROI from SLA increases. We'll tag team along there. And then, of course, how to go about making a case for asking for more headcount is a pretty key one as well. So we'll walk through some of that. And let's jump right on in. And, how do I show that cost savings from adherence gains? The reason that this is one that is near and dear to our heart is these are hours that you are already paying for. Unlike something that you're trying to get extra hours coming in, something like that. These are the adherence hours. We're measuring adherence on the productive events. You are already paying for those. We want to retarget those and get that increase. We actually do see, you'll see reduction in overtime hours, customer wait times, dissatisfaction, agent frustration. This all makes a lot of sense, but it's just really important to look at that overall from your adherence and retarget it. And just to give an idea here, we actually have some customers, and not to go full down a sales rep, but we actually have some customers that will go through this on their larger teams, get this adherence increase, be able to quantify it, which we're going to show how to quantify it here in a second. And it's actually more than they spend just having assembled on their yearly overall. So there's an immediate ROI. Leadership's happy. Everybody's happy right away. And you can just build out from there. So let's jump into like an actual example. This is anonymized, but this is actually from one of our customers here. These are numbers that we worked with them to put into a deck, but this is not something that we just made up. This is some adherence before and after on the phone and chat teams. So getting this into play, we've gone over how you can help get adherence up. This is just showing the before and after. And we're only seeing phone go up to a 61% adherence. That's still pretty low. Chat adherence is getting better, the 81%, but these are some large jumps. But this actually went to a $72,000 of savings of retargeting those hours per year. If we think about it, especially when we're trying to cut things, to the line, that's a lot of time and a lot of money that is already being spent and not targeted in that. We've got the productive hours worked targeted is increased, but more importantly, if you don't want to look at the total yearly savings, it's 69 hours that are just additionally retargeted across all the agents, the week across all the different channels. That's a lot. I mean, an individual person is not going to give you 69 hours. So we might be looking at maybe in the 20s or 30s of hours that a person's going to give. So this could be, 2.5 people worth of hours that you were just retargeting and getting back. And like you're saying, it's fewer abandoned customers, revenue loss. This really helps with the budgeting accuracy for finance, because now you're saying when you're going through and making the budget, we all know when we're looking at capacity plans and stuff, we're probably going to assume that adherence and things and occupancy are higher. They're not going to be perfect, but they're higher. So the more we can actually bring reality into line with those assumptions, the better it's going to make us look when the budget isn't super crazy. So this is one of the examples that we have here. Like I said, this is a live example, but how do we get to this example, right? We just pulled some of the data. We can kind of infer it, but maybe let's step in a little bit and see if we can break this down just some more. So I don't know how many of you have been around on our webinars for a while, but we have a friend here who has been absent for a while, but they are back now. And that is our friend, James Bond, who is going to walk us through an example here of how to do this. So James Bond with the lovely Daniel Craig representing James Bond this time. It needs to show their adherence, show their leadership, how increasing adherence will save on the labor costs. So take us through it, James Bond. All right. So MI6 has a chat adherence goal of 90%. MI6 has a lot of serious stuff they've got to deal with. So their adherence goal is pretty high. And they like to do chat just because I guess that's a little bit easier and they don't want to all take phone calls. So let's take a look at some of the just 3 representative agents that they have here. We've got Moneypenny, just knocking out of the park, nailing that 90%, not going too high, not going too low. Tanner with 80%, and Mathis. Oh, Mathis is not even halfway there at 40%. So this is pretty bad right here. So let's take a look and see, just by moving these up, how can we start to do the math here and get this built out for our leadership? Let's go ahead and do some assumptions here. We want to get the 2 underachievers, Tanner and Mathis, up to that 90%. And we're going to assume that we have 32 hours of productive time a week, right? We've got shrinkage. We've covered these in lots of things, but that person who's scheduled for maybe 45 hours a week with 5 hours of lunches, it gets cut down a lot. 32 is what we're going with. That gets 28.8 hours of adherence if we're going to that 90%. That is how many hours that we're going to have specifically targeted that we want to do. And if we break the math down here, we can see the difference of that 80%. And oh my gosh, Mathis, seriously, with the 12.8 hours that are actually targeted to the adherence, I'm not even sure how they're messing up their adherence this bad. This is just incredible that they're doing it. Well, we can do the difference between these. Basically, what is the difference between this and the 28.8 actual hours that we're wanting? Get the total amount of hours, and it's going to be 19.2 hours weekly that we are going ahead and looking to retarget and get back into there. And this is only across the 2 agents here. Moneypenny's, she's showing us how it's done. So it's really across the 2 agents, and you can see how this scales up the more you go. And even just small increases can really start to add up and have some ROI here. So we take that out. We take the weekly hours. We extrapolate that out. We know there's probably 52 weeks a year. If there's not 52 weeks in a year, then something else has gone wrong. We can see that that's going to give us the 921.6, get real precise here, hours gained annually. Maybe we'll round it up to 922, make us look real good. And over $20,000 in retargeted cost saves. And because we can work that in to the amount of agents that we know give us full-time hours, which is that 32 hours is full-time, we can say that this is about 0.6. Maybe we'll round that up because we don't like to work in partial people. People are whole people, not partial people. Maybe we round that up and say it's about an agent worth of work that we have saved. That's pretty great. There's a cost savings, there's a hiring, there's all sorts of things. There's now one more person that we maybe don't have to go and chase when we're already fighting attrition and going after and hiring. So really great way to annualize this and build this out. So thank you, James Bond, for walking us through that fleshed out example. And of course, here is kind of how we present it in that same view that we had before. Here's the hours that we had in adherence before, hours after, 28% cost savings, productive hour savings, and then the overall benefits. This way, it depends on if you've got maybe a finance person looking at it, or if you've got somebody that's going to care more about the headcount. You're breaking it down into the subsequent parts and go that way. So James Bond, always helpful, but we'll TLDR for it real quick here. We got a slide showing this. You take your adherence percentage, you calculate how many higher percentage points it is than your actuals. You take that resulting percentage, multiply it by your weekly hours, extrapolate it out to the yearly number, do it across your different channels, your different queues, and then multiply that by your average hourly rate, and then you got your savings estimates. So if you need just a quick one, take a screenshot of this slide, take it from the recording. This is a real quick way to just build that formula into whatever you are using and extrapolate that out. And of course, don't forget that this does not have to be a perfect thing. In that first example, sure, James Bond, we were getting them up to 90%. But in that first example, remember, the phone was only going up to in the 60s, I think, percent adherence. That's still a measurable gain, and you can continue to work on it from there. So even if you don't get perfect, you don't get exactly to the goal right away, do the math, do this, and you can show, hey, here's how just moving this needle along the way is going to save us this amount of money. And we can see immediate ROI and then longer term ROI if we continue to invest in this. And that way you've got that really outlined for your leadership team here. So I said this before, I guess I already jumped the gun, but lots of people see just adherence can sometimes pay for the tool as well. Now I went through pretty in-depth there. James Bond helped us out, but I'm going to pause here and see, we might actually have a question that popped up, or if anybody has any questions about going through this ROI on the adherence and how to break that down. Did anything pop up?
Yeah, we have a great question here from Jenny. Jenny asks, once you provide the details to the org, do you also provide follow-up on how adherence is improving? And have you noticed differences in success depending how good an org is at coaching their agents? That's a fantastic question, Jenny.
That is a fantastic question. Yes, the ongoing updates, maybe this will make me sound like a broken record, but just about everything that I say that you do in Workforce is not a one-time or set it and forget it. You're always revisiting this. Maybe you're reporting this out on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, or maybe even weekly, if you can actually pull that data that quickly and say, here's how we're improving, hopefully not seeing a dip. You might see some dips when you bring in new hires. So you want to keep that going overall. And the nice thing is, if you keep that in a nice timeline of here's how we've been increasing, maybe week over week, month over month, yada, yada, then by the end of the year, you've already had all that data pulled and you can say, here's the entire year broken up, or here's maybe 2-3 years ago when we started this, and the overall jump, and then those small little increases that people say, oh, it's not that much. And you go, yeah, but look at it extrapolated out over the entire year. And this is actual. It's not just what we were assuming. This is a huge amount. And the reason we didn't have to hire those people or X, Y, or Z. And then the differences in success, depending on how good an org is at coaching their agents. This is a big one too. A lot of the times, and Sam, I'll love to get your opinion after this too. A lot of the times, this isn't exactly covered fully in the onboarding. Your onboarding a lot of the times covers, we want to make sure that the customers are getting their questions answered, that we're being accurate with it. We're not just giving them free phones and our CSAT's really high and maybe our handle times are down, but that's not what we're supposed to be doing. So if it doesn't focus on this other side of how to actually keep your metrics going and why those metrics have a knock-on impact and they're actually good, not just for making the number higher, but what the knock-on benefits are. If you don't have that built in from the start, it can be really tough. I know at T-Mobile, we would actually have a quarter-day session of the 8 weeks of training where workforce management would come in. I love running these sorts of sessions and actually walk through all these metrics, how they help, how they're going to help your score when it comes down to realignment, but then also how they have those knock-on effects. And it helps a lot more having it at the groundwork and then going forward instead of trying to bring it into an already, fixing the car while it's going. And the second part to this here is that just by showing this, once you have something that you can measure, then it's something that you can improve. It's really hard to improve it if you're not measuring it. Just turning this on, having it as something that's measurable, even without the coaching, obviously that does enable the coaching. Agents, there are a lot of agents who are going to just go ahead and work on getting their performance better because now they can see it. Now they can actually work on that. So I'll hop off my soapbox here for a second and let Sam add some color here.
Yeah, now it's my turn to hop up on the soapbox, my favorite place to be. So there's quite a bit of nuance here as far as how coaching impacts things and also how you can think about adherence, not just as a one-time measure, but something to be thinking about in kind of a longer-term holistic vision. So in my experience implementing folks with Assembled, and I've had quite a few customers come through in the last few years. I think I'm up to 200 or so folks I've implemented, so seen quite a bit of the landscape out there. The thing that's really interesting is for folks that don't have a tool at all, there's a really big clarifying effect from the first jump moment when they have a tool like Assembled that for the first time gives you that clarity into adherence. It's kind of a bit of a, for any of the physics nerds out here, a bit of a quantum effect in the sense of just having it be observed seems to have some measure of impact because as folks socialize the fact that, hey, somebody can see my activity, it's not uncommon at all to see 10 or 20% jumps in adherence just from having that be known alone, that people can see what I, as an agent, am doing. It's probably not a huge surprise to anyone, but that alone has a big impact in causing people to be more adherent. But past that point, it is a lot of that incremental movement of kind of 5% here, 5% there until you get up to your goal. And it's important to think about it not just as a one-time motion, but as something you're going to keep a pulse check on ongoing. And of course, those 5% increments over time, there's a saying that shavings make piles. And it's so true, especially when it comes to that bottom line ROI. So it's a really great idea to think about things in terms of incremental improvement, measure that ROI increment by increment, but then also be able to tell that longer term story of hey, 1 year ago, our adherence was 40%. Now it's 90%. And I've saved our company $500 million, or probably not, but whatever that number works out to be, is very compelling. So kind of being able to back into both sides of the narrative is really, I think, an interesting and important tool in your toolkit. And then finally, on have you noticed differences in success depending on how good an org is at coaching their agents? Really, the information, of course, like I mentioned earlier, just having that surface does always have some kind of impact for just the human behavior of knowing that someone can see. But really past that initial gain in adherence, everything is all about how you message that to agents, how you're coaching on it, because having the information alone, of course, that's the first step in the journey. But if agents don't get coached around how they can improve their adherence and why they should be thinking about it, that's where typically gains start to slip. And to Adrian's point earlier, a huge part of this is also baking into onboarding, that it's not just about giving customers a really great experience when they are working with you. It's also really important to be available to customers during the times that you're scheduled to be. And during my time at Imperfect Foods back in the day, something we did for onboarding agents was basically we had a little intro to workforce management session where, one, we introduced ourselves all as people, but we also explained to the department KPIs, how agent behavior can influence those, including adherence, and why adherence is so important for SLA gains. So really just painting the picture early and often that being in the right place at the right time really matters, and then continuing to enforce that over time with coaching sessions, typically manager to agent. So that's a quick picture from my side of the peanut gallery. But with that, I'll go ahead and kick the ball back out to Val for a quick poll from here.
Yes, folks, we would love to hear about how you heard about this webinar. So you'll see that poll pop up on your screen.
All right, thanks. And I'm going to assume there's no other questions in here. So I'm guessing everybody's adherence is perfect, right? Nobody needs any work here. It's all 90% or above. Great. So adherence, as you can tell, there's quite a bit that we feel strongly about this, because it is one that is very, like, your workforce tool can really, really help drive that one home versus some of the other ones that are a little bit more maybe on the agent behavior side, things like that. But let's shift gears now and let's go and look at the almighty service level, our SLA here, and how can we get some ROI and illustrate that with SLA increases? Everybody knows SLA, like, the number should go up, right? What does that really mean? So Sam and I are going to split into this one, and I'll start off with a little bit of the first part here. With the first one is less workload overall. This one is something that we as workforce professionals probably understand, but it is kind of hard to maybe make it so people who don't, eat, sleep, and drink workforce can understand this. Fewer repeated contact attempts. Customers less likely to try and handle multiple contact channels. That's me. If I'm on hold, I'm going to hit up chat too. Handle times drop when the SLAs are higher. And let's see, do we have a slide specifically outlining this? Yeah, so let's go into here. Less workload overall, fewer repeated customer contact attempts. People are on hold, right? If they drop and abandon, then they're probably going to call back. So now you have this kind of like overarching time when they were on hold. It didn't actually result in anything except for probably a more upset customer. But then they're going to add an additional call or another chat or another email later on because they are trying to contact back in. So your SLAs are up, your SLAs are down, and you're going to just add in workload. Then we can go down the path of, okay, what does more workload mean? We all kind of know that path. Less likely to do multiple contact channels. I'm sure Sam's had some experience in this as well, where now you've got somebody like me who's impatient. I'm on the phone. I'm also trying to chat. Maybe I'm sending in an email. So that's hitting up contacts in all the different channels you might support. And then afterwards, you've got to merge those back in. There's just so many knock-on workload effects that come from this because people are having to wait, which is what SLA is really at the core trying to get down. And handle times drop when the SLAs are higher. We're all people. I have been on the phones. I'm sure most of us have been on the contact channels as well. And when you were looking at that wall of calls, whether or not you have some sort of monitor to show that, or you just know that your friends are, getting onto back-to-back calls or chats or whatever it might be, you're going to take a little bit of time, right? It's only natural to not just rush off. This is a really, really hard thing to take two strangers that are in a little bit of a tense situation, maybe really tense on the customer side, put them together with no introduction really, and then have them come up with a solution. So that's hard to do. It's a really tough skill set. So people are going to say, I don't want to hop onto that next call right away. Maybe I'll just go ahead and spend a little bit more time with this customer. And that just has that knock on that butterfly effect. And now it's built up. You've got repeated contact attempts. You've got multiple contact channels. You've got longer handle times, and it kind of just spirals into this overall thing. So those are things that you can measure. Go back, pull your data, and see how that's actually costing you more money with that workload and then the amount of staffing, maybe the amount of overtime that's really expensive you've had to spend to do that. And it's one of the ones that's maybe a little bit easier to show. So that's the very workforce nuts and bolt part, but I'm going to hand it over to Sam to go through some other sections here.
Yeah, definitely. And would you mind keying on to the next slide, Adrian? Cool. Thank you. So from here, this is actually a really interesting headline that I'm sure a lot of us saw around the LinkedIn and Slackosphere recently. It certainly dominated my attention for a few days. But basically, there was a recent study that was published that as customer problems hit a record high, meaning that there's more people reaching out to support than there ever have been before, 70+% of all people are saying that they've had a customer service problem in the last year that resulted in them contacting support. And then not only are the numbers of folks contacting higher, there's also a new problem with vengeance seekers, meaning that there's more people out there that in response to a bad customer service experience, they're not just taking that experience, then hanging up the phone and moving on with their lives. They're actually taking that experience and taking it out on the brand again in an act of vengeance. And vengeance can look like a few different things. Of course, there's always the classic going to social media and putting that brand on blast. I'm sure we've all seen posts like this inside of our social media feeds, or perhaps we've even occasionally been the poster for something along the lines of, oh no, I had this awful experience with the brand and I'm never coming back. None of my friends and family should ever come back. And if word of mouth to a brand is everything, negative word of mouth is certainly something that really needs a lot of consideration there. Because if you have people online speaking very negatively about your brand, that can have all kinds of ripple effects on not just the perception of your brand, but also the ultimate bottom line that falls out of that. And that's just on kind of that classic vengeance scenario. But the other side of this, which I think a lot of workforce folks here will already know well from kind of struggles behind the scenes, is folks that will not just repeat contact innocently, as Adrian already went over with contacting maybe over email and phone and chat, hoping to get a faster response. There's also people that once they've had a negative association with that brand due to a customer service experience, will then basically immediately call back in and harass or intentionally call in just to basically waste operational time, because perhaps they feel like you've wasted my time or you've slighted me. So now I'm going to get back at you operationally in this only way that I know how. So these are some pretty scary headlines out there for CX folks in the trenches. It definitely made me go, yikes. Not sure if I'm alone in that, but definitely some pretty major news on that vengeance side there. So this is all kind of speaking to things from this more like negative lens of things that are bad that can happen in response to these negative customer service experiences, which we all, I think, are pretty well socialized to. But of course, there's also all of the upside to good customer service experience on the hard ROI and your bottom line. And if you would, oh, excuse me, if you wouldn't mind keying forward again, Adrian. Amazing. So everyone here knows that first response time has a major impact on CSAT. And then, of course, CSAT has a major impact in ROI and people coming back to your brand again and again. So that means first response time is a really crucial metric for your business for making sure that people do come back again and again. So a few facts from a little customer perspective over here. 90% of all customers rank an immediate first response as very important. This is coming from our friends over at Klaus. It was a really fascinating study if anyone wants to read along. And then 66% of customers agree that respecting their time is the number one thing a company can do to provide good service. And I think this is actually pretty intuitive if you think about it. But when I saw that number one thing, it really kind of blew my mind, because that means that it sounds like quite a bit of how someone will rank their customer service is actually kind of already decided before the agent picks up the phone, just based on how long they've had to wait. And when you think about that, that's pretty intuitive, because if I call a brand and then it takes an hour for a service rep to get on the line with me, even if that service rep is really the very best person at their job that I could possibly ask for and they solve that issue, I'm still going to be coming in hot because I've spent an hour waiting to get to that person. And at the end of the day, that long hour-long wait time that's what I remember more than the fact that I had a really great interaction with that agent for a few minutes. So it totally makes intuitive sense here, but basically at a high level, we can tell first response time has a really big impact on how satisfied people feel with their experience, and then ultimately how satisfied they feel with the brand. And then moving into some of the hard bottom line aspects of this, for kind of why does this matter, funneling up to some of these like hard ROI pieces. Customers who have a great support experience spend 140% more on average than those that had the poorest experience. So just thinking about that number, that's basically like your sales team has to find one less customer almost for like every two people that have a really great experience. And it's much harder to get a new person involved in your business than it is to just keep building out your wonderful support base with folks that already know and like you and want to come back and spend that money. Then, of course, 95% of customers that have a great support experience return for another purchase. I actually think this speaks quite handedly towards the well-known paradox of support that I'm sure a lot of folks here are very in the weeds with. But for folks that may not know, the paradox of support is the idea that for folks that have a problem with a product or a brand, and then go back and interact with their service team and have a really amazing experience, those people are actually more likely to come back and make more purchases, not just than people that had a poor experience, but also in some cases than people that never reached out to support in the first place. So it's a really interesting kind of paradox where basically folks that have issues sometimes end up spending more money because if they have a really great positive interaction with you as a brand, that then becomes how they know you as a brand. And I actually think, just to give a specific call out here, I personally think Chewy does an in particular amazing job of taking advantage of this for anyone that's reached out to them. Of course, like sometimes you reach out and you're like, hey, I need to cancel my order. And then the next thing you know, you have a lovely personalized note from their team. Perhaps I've received portraits of my dogs in the mail from them before. But all of those little positive touches that make you more likely to come back and be a customer again and again. And then finally, kind of going all the way up to more the boardroom side of things, companies with top-rated customer support experience outperform those with poor experiences by 3.4x on the stock exchange. So this isn't even just the immediate return on investment in terms of dollars that people are spending right now. This is also funneling up to how people view you as a brand all the way up to the stock exchange, which is super significant. And if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide, Adrian. And this is just a figure we also took from that Watermark Consulting data point that I referenced a moment ago. But what this essentially breaks down is that for CX leaders in the industry, which are people that have really stellar CSAT scores, people that have really stellar support experiences, they perform basically at this figure of 307.3% against the S&P 500 index. So that's a quick picture there. And then for folks that are CX laggards, which are people that have notoriously awful customer service experience, there's also this inverse effect of them underperforming the average as well by a very similar margin. So we know CSAT matters not just in terms of that immediate who's spending money at the business, but also funneling upwards into those more long-term brand reputation items and the ROI that can funnel out of that. And with that, I'll go ahead and hop off my soapbox and give the soapbox back over to Adrian.
Thanks, Sam. These stats, just as a side note, when we were coming together to put this webinar together, Sam brought up the revenge statistic, which I hadn't personally heard of as that, and it's just like a scary way to title it, but it is a totally true thing. And these are kind of scary things to think about, just like these hold times or whatever can really have these knock-on effects like we've been talking about. But Val, while Sam was going through that, did any questions come in that we can jump on and answer?
We actually did have some around here for adherence.
Okay.
And just to give this a read, and this actually might be more assembled related. What are the correct agent states to consider as adherent in a Zendesk ticket? For example, Zendesk dashboard out of the box is adherent, but that doesn't reflect that they're actually working on tickets, but perhaps our ticket queue is empty. How do you balance this?
Great. Yeah. Sam, you might have the most state here.
Yeah, I'm totally happy to speak to that. Thank you for the great question, Nate. So for folks that may be less familiar with the way that Assembled thinks about adherence, just kind of a very quick picture at it, we essentially pick up states from inside of a contact platform, and then you guys map those states inside of Assembled for adherence, essentially. So for each state that comes into the contact platform, you set a certain rule set for when someone's scheduled, basically which states count as in or out of adherence. And Nate just asked a really great question for states like being online in the Zendesk dashboard, which technically doesn't mean that that person's actively working on tickets, but they are logged in Zendesk. What's the correct way to think about that for adherence, especially when you might have teams that do need to move outside of kind of a standard ticket process in order to get information, such as like one I hear a lot is perhaps moving to a KB or moving to a dashboard or something like that to be able to fully investigate a ticket. And my usual recommendation for thinking this through, though, Nate, as a heads up, your CSM will probably have more specific to you guys advice. This is kind of more just me speaking more generally. But in general, the way I think about adherence is it's important to remember that adherence is relative and not absolute. So you're not necessarily aiming for 100% from all of your people all of the time. In fact, you'll probably never actually hit that 100% mark in my experience. But you're more looking for what is my team's average. And as an example, if your team's average is 65, just as an example, perhaps that would be your cue that like, oh, hey, maybe if you're just starting out with Assembled, which I know doesn't apply to you guys over at Klaviyo, maybe that would be your cue that your adherence percent should be 70% or 85%. So usually I advise people to think about adherence first as where is my team currently, and then nudging that up bit over bit until you hit a point that is sustainable. And then usually how you can find basically what should my baseline be is look at the people on your team that are your top performers, like people that you see that consistently hit it out of the park on the contacts per hour front that you're looking for, whatever metrics matter to you. And then see what does their adherence inside of Assembled typically look like. And don't get me wrong, there may still be room to move the needle with your top performers, but that's usually a good barometer of about how much time you can expect people to be outside of Zendesk or whatever your contact platform is. Because essentially if like your top performers are spending like X% of time outside of Zendesk, that's probably a good indicator that that's kind of time you should bake into your adherence assumption. But happy to chat about this in more detail offline. And of course, like I mentioned, your CSM will probably have a more specific to you guys take than I do. This is just kind of a general and off the top of my head. But Adrian, do you have any other color there you would like to add?
No, that was a really great one. There's got the creative juices flowing here. A couple other things to add to that. Everything Sam said was amazing, and I think the adherence is relative, things like that, to the point of if they're logged into Zendesk, into tickets, right? We are adherence doesn't care about availability because they're adhering to their schedule. So somebody's not going to get marked out of adherence because they log in to take phone calls and it's slow and they don't take phone calls the entire day. If they were there, logged in to phone, to chat, to email, to take those contacts, the contacts aren't there. That's not a knock on the employee. That is a knock on maybe us in workforce for overscheduling too many people. So that's one thing to think about as well, is like they can still be adherent even if there are no tickets in queue, so they're not working those. But maybe to the flip side of that, they're logged in, so they're adhering to their schedule, but are they actually doing the work? Email is a very prime example of ones where that can happen because it's not like an inbound synchronous, it's always coming in, that maybe they're not doing the work. Well, we're capturing that as well, especially in Zendesk. And we have the Zendesk, our plugin that'll go and give you that extra amount of data. So you can see that extrapolated out. If they're not actually having some productivity per hour, some solves per hour coming out of that, or it's very low, then you can probably assume, oh, they're logged in, they're meeting adherence, but they're not actually doing the work. So that's not helping me. And then to dive really deep into it, you can go into the actual, the agent scorecards, and then their productivity, their timeline, and we'll break down specifically, especially in Zendesk, like by the second, did they open this ticket? Were they in this ticket? Like, and so on and so forth. So you can actually see the underlying work they're doing. And it's really cool with our Zendesk one because you can actually click and it'll link you out to your Zendesk with the specific ticket information and see if they were just in it or if they actually added, useful information or closed it out. So a lot of different ways to do it. we do enable some of those, but it's a good question because that is one of the tricky ones where maybe you're adherent, but are you really actually giving me the work there? All right. Was there any other questions that came in?
Yeah, we have one really great one from Jenny. Have you ever seen pushback or eroded trust when this is implemented and agents feel monitored or micromanaged? Do you mind if I pipe in on this one first, Adrian?
I was just going to say, Sam, I bet you have a great take on this. Go for it.
Yeah, so the answer is transparently yes. Sometimes there is emotion of like pushback or feeling maybe a little bit big brothery. I actually was part of the process for rolling out Assemble to my own team at Imperfect. So I've seen this firsthand as well as with a lot of other companies that have implemented us during my time that I've been here. And I think it's kind of a natural feeling, especially for folks that are rolling out a tool like this for the first time, that like, oh no, someone's looking over my shoulder and checking in on what I'm doing. Kind of a natural concern for agents. But the way that I always have encouraged folks to think about it, and I think it really helps assuage some of this concern for agents, is that adherence in a way actually is a huge win to the folks on your team that actually are your high flyers. Because as an example, like honestly, this is very true for most organizations that I've seen implement this for the first time. Once you get this data flowing in for the first time, typically what you'll see is that it turns out that like 30% of your agents are in adherence most of the time and are really killing it on their CPH, and they're really just like doing all the things they should be doing. And then you might have like a 70% or 50% of people that are being a little bit less on the ball to various degrees. Like usually there's a whole rainbow of what that looks like. Like you'll have some people that might have like 20% adherence. Most people will be in the middle of the pack. But anyway, where I'm going with this though is if you only have a certain small segment of your team that actually is in adherence, what ends up happening is those people end up running at very high occupancy. Because, for example, if you have people that if you have half your team assigned to chat, but only 2 of the people are actually there available to take chats, they'll get routed chats again and again and again because there's not anyone for them to be round robining with to be able to keep things at a bit of a lower level. So what ends up happening is it's a very unfair distribution of work, and you end up with a bunch of people that putting on my agent hat are all making the same amount of money, but some people doing much more work than others. So one way you can kind of pitch adherence to agents that I've seen land really well is that this ensures that there's an even distribution of work and that no one in particular is getting burnt out. And that's one way I've seen folks pitch adherence in a way that is very agent friendly. And it is very true. Like I've seen it time and time again that your occupancy percentages will also kind of even out over time as you start thinking more about adherence universally. And then even more than that, the other thing I like to think about a lot is adherence is relative and not absolute. So you're not aiming for your agent to be in 100% adherence all the time. You're more aiming typically for something around like 80, 85, 90% in most businesses that I've worked with as kind of more of a longer term goal. Of course, we want that to be as high as possible always as WFM folks, but you're not necessarily seeking 100. You're seeking what's the right balance for your team. So I think emphasizing to agents that like, yes, we can see what you're doing, but it's not like we're looking for you to be 100% on the ball, perfect all the time. We're just looking to see where the time is going and also making sure that the work is balanced evenly. And by the way, kind of backing into my own experience rolling this out to my team at Imperfect, how we first thought about the adherence percent is we actually thought about like, okay, how much time can we generally expect agents to reasonably be off task each week? And then we came up with basically an hour number that made sense for our particular team based on the things that we knew folks had to do. Like, for example, like running out to go get water breaks, bathroom breaks, maybe an unplanned meeting, things like that. And then we basically baked in, I believe it was like 4 hours or so a week if somebody's like scheduled for, let's say like 32 hours of productive time, that we would estimate that they would probably just organically lose to other things. And we baked that into our adherence assumption. And it was really helpful to explain to agents scientifically that like, hey, when you're off task, that's actually already baked into this assumption that we're making. And as long as you're not going above and beyond this point that is like kind of a reasonable point for you to be hitting, you're going to be just fine. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of sell adherence to agents as a way to make occupancy a bit more fair and make the workload distribution more fair, but as well as just soothing them that it's more just to get an administrative sense of where the time is going and making sure work's distributed evenly than like wanting to keep a minute by minute pulse check on anyone. So I'll go ahead and hop off my soapbox now, but Adrian, I know you've rolled out similar tools as well, so would love to hear any takes you might have from the trenches as well.
Yeah, I'll quickly add one more here too. Once again, going to like maybe the nuts and bolts of the workforce side and the numbers is going through and saying, hey, even to these people who might be worried about it, like it sucks to be in queue. It sucks to be in these sort of things like we're back to back. And this is going to help. So everything that we're kind of outlining here for maybe leadership or stakeholders should, in theory, be also cascaded down. Maybe not the financials, but like, hey, you know what? We can save X amount of hours needed. We can retarget these hours just by basically having something we can measure. It can make your life easier. We're not just putting this in here to be all of a sudden the time cops that are watching you, but everybody just makes a little bit of an improvement. And now you don't have to come in and regret these Mondays, not only because they're Mondays like Garfield and you hate them, but because they also are just like constantly busy. We're actually going to not have to hire anybody. It's a pretty immediate thing we can do and smooth that out. So that's another way that I've gone about it, with just kind of giving them some of the details. And I like to err on the side of the more details, the better, up and down the chain. And it just helps everybody kind of buy in a lot more.
Right. And I also actually want to call out Brandon from Cleveland Golf's comment here in the chat, because I think it is also very true and super well done. Brandon mentioned that for his team at Cleveland Golf, they use this to paint a picture to leadership actually of how awesome and productive their agents are, and being able to back into that scientifically has been really helpful on their team. And his comment actually also reminded me that as part of our rollout at Imperfect Foods, we also started with what we referred to as the Excellent Engagement Award. We're a big food pun team over there, that basically rewarded agents that had the highest adherence scores month over month with a prize and a little shout out at our monthly all hands as well. And we also saw some positive change from that as people started being more competitive in a fun way with what their adherence could look like. And we actually drafted up a little post about that on our blog a few weeks back. I linked it in the chat, but if anyone's curious about some of that positive reinforcement stuff, I recommend checking it out.
Awesome. And I know everybody loved hearing Sam's answers, and Sam's the one who wrote that blog post, so definitely go check it out. All right. Let's continue along here. I think we've gotten through all the questions, and these are great questions. We really appreciate the interaction here, and jumping in to answer them as well. It's like super awesome, because we are just like two opinions here, and there's a million different ones and ways to do this. So really appreciate it. All right. So the last one here, how can we use scenarios to ask for more headcount? All right. Now we got to ask for that headcount. We got to do it. It's real tough. If it was tough in 2022, it's real tough in 2023. So let's jump into some of the things that you can do. Once again, many different ways to do this. And we'll go from something on like the immediate need to maybe the longer term needs. Let's start off here with heat maps. These we know, they're immediate, your upcoming needs. Overtime is expensive. Flexing schedule moves might only get you part of the way there. Some sandbox scenarios with your schedule moves, the what ifs to show changes to workload demand and agent performance. And then of course, capacity planning, which if you have gone to any of my webinars before, I probably mentioned capacity planning in every single one. And we just did a great 2-part series. This is like the one that I feel like is the one to rule them all. And it is the long-term need. Mostly it is one that takes a bit more time, but you can see over that very long term, what are these going to need? Are we going to need to build, add more people in because of a bunch of different inputs, attrition being one of those, and then perfect for more what if scenarios. Capacity plans can get extremely complicated, but that also gives you the ability to tweak all these different things for your what ifs. So let's just dive in a little bit more to heat maps with our favorite Christmas tree colors, or because I now live in New Mexico, this would be the red and green chili, because you have to have a choice here. But we'll go with the Christmas colors here. Make sure immediate need obvious. This is one that I just love to show people, not this particular one because it's bad, but I love to show people in general because it just paints a picture of, oh my gosh, Like, we need help. We need to do something. I'm not just going to rely on your numbers and, oh, these numbers they don't make any sense to me. This is a nice visual to say it's bad. Like, if you don't want all of these times to be terrible and people to be churning and then people to be trading because they're overworked, we got to fix this. But people might come to this and say, well, let's go and get overtime. OT is expensive. Even if you get enough this week, can you keep that going? And then run the math. The math is not hard on overtime spend versus hiring. Yes, the hiring takes longer to get into there. But it's just not a permanent solution. Same with like flexing. I do like flexing and moving schedules. But if you're just relying on those last ditch ones all the time, you're not going to solve the underlying issue. And hopefully your business is growing, right? So your need for support's actually increasing as well. So then you're like, if you don't do it now, you're just going to be further into the hole. And there's an interesting one with OT, an interesting story that I like to share. So at T-Mobile a few years back, maybe more than a few years, it's been some time, as we got up to some of the launches, and I believe this was for actually the iPhone launch, we always had overtime that we needed people to pick up. And then one of these years we thought, let's actually put the overtime, because it was going to be that midnight availability, not like the full launch, but where you can reserve your iPhone or something, and it launches at midnight PST. Great. Tough to get people to sign up for overtime for midnight, right? Because that's a tough time. So we were rolling out the overtime. The overtime needs, they were crazy high because we expected tens of thousands of people to be like on the dot trying to get, it's probably the iPhone 10 or something, where it was like a brand new design. And as we got closer, we weren't getting the overtime. So leadership said, all right, let's start sweetening the pot. And I think we ended up at something like 2.5 times your pay for these specific targeted hours. People were making a lot of money. Well, that backfired on us because we got the hours. It wasn't as busy as it was. We sent people home, which is fine. But what did people learn? They learned just wait out leadership. And the next time there's a big need, just wait them out, because they'll offer 2.5 times instead of 1.5 times. And they're probably still dealing with that to this day. So just a way of like trying to do these Band-Aid needs can really bite you in the butt. And now that math is super easy to go and say, yeah, we should just hire people instead of paying 2.5 times. Because at that point, they're all out buying Porsches and boats, which is great for them, but probably not for the bottom line of the company. So heat maps, show them the heat maps. Sandboxes, they're not just for kids. We like sandbox environments here. A couple different things that you can do. And I know I'm showing the assembled view here, but you can do this in any sort of system or way that you're using it. Have your what ifs for configurations. So for us assembled users, you can actually go in and you can change your service targets and say, you know what? Maybe this 95% service level is a little aggressive. What if we took it to like a 90 or like an 80, 85%? What if our response time went up a little bit? Same thing at Stripe. We actually looked at our chat channel for our priority support. We had it set for a 30-second. We wanted our service levels to be 30 seconds. And then we weren't meeting those. And we went and took a look at our CSAT and all the other customer scores. And there was actually, if you map them out, a very specific drop off at about 1 to 2 minutes or so. And we thought, well, great, we'll just extend our targets to 2 minutes, since that's when people start to get upset about waiting anyways. And we immediately were able to run through a sandbox environment, see that we needed less workload. The customer experience wasn't changed. They only had to wait another like 90 seconds longer than normal. That's not that much. And it saved us money and was a big win. So sandbox environments, they're great. And you can also go in and do schedule changes. When you're in assembled, you can move schedules around and it live updates on the timeline to give you ideas and help you see some of the metrics before you even click save. Or you can go into draft schedules, things like that, where you make maybe something that's completely different, show it to somebody, get the buy-in, and then you make that the live one as well. So you go through those sandboxes, and this is a great one to show as well. Hey, we're moving things around, we're optimizing, we're adjusting it. Maybe we're still not there. And then we have X shortfall of hours. We talked about how you turn that into people by dividing that into adherence. And that's where I have to have some needs to go and pick up some actual people instead of just, tweaking things a little bit. And then finally, and I promise to not spend the next hour on capacity planning as much as I would love to spend the next hour or so on capacity planning, but there's 2 webinars to go back and watch to do that. And then download this great template. Capacity planning, all roads lead to here. If you're not doing this in some fashion, you're really selling yourself short. This is the one where you have the ultimate what if machine. You can tweak all of these different inputs. You can go and say, hey, if we even just did this little tiny change, how's that going to have a knock-on effect? You can put that into total costs. the one thing that you start to see here is you visualize attrition. We all know that it's there, but if you're looking at like those knee-jerk reactions and just the next 1 or 2 weeks and you're looking at staffing, you're really not going to see the attrition like overall. You might notice that, okay, now one of my schedules isn't filled because somebody left. But when you look at it this way, you can start to see, okay, here's where we actually need headcount. Here's how attrition actually eats into us. Once again, at the 2 of the big companies I worked for, we had to keep the accelerator going for hiring classes all the time, just because the amount of attrition would eat away and you constantly had to have classes going. If you wanted to grow anything beyond that, you had to either add classes or fill them up even higher. So it's a very, very big thing to be looking at. Attrition can be the killer if you're not watching it. And this gives you that long-term plan. So now that you've solved some of those immediate needs, you started to build it out. Hopefully you're using a combination of all of these to paint the picture to your leadership of this. You can start to look ahead. And this is what's going to make you look real smart, is when you're looking ahead a year, year and a half in advance, 2 years in advance, whatever it might be. And you're starting to get to your leadership and say, we're not going to get behind the 8 ball like we were before, where we were in those super understaffed times on the heat maps and things like that. We're not going to do that because now we've built out this plan. We can go for the headcount. I'm not surprised with bad SLA misses and having to report that up. You aren't surprised with knee-jerk reactions to headcount increases. We've already discussed and talked about this. It's going to make you look really great, and it's going to make the business operate a lot better overall. So those are some 3 big ones there. We can go way more into detail. Our contact information is included here to dive into more of that, because I know we are running a little bit short on time, but lots and lots more that we can dig into here. And I see something going on with the chat. There might have been another poll, but did any questions come in while we were going through these last little parts? No questions. Okay. Oh, yes. And Jenny, I just saw your thing there about recognizing people for adherence and not working themselves crispy. I haven't heard the word crispy yet, but I'm going to use it now. That's pretty great. All right. So Val, I think, has a poll coming out there, or even just a general chat. So before you hop off, I know some people might have already had. Please drop us in a topic about what you might want to hear about. We have our ideas, but we love to hear what you all want to talk about. You probably see that on our LinkedIns, our personal ones, and our company ones as well. We really want this to be like a crowd-driven and a community-sourced what we should talk about versus just us. Because if it was me, it'd be capacity planning all the time. You know what it is. We want you to say, here's the topic we want to hear about, and then we'll go and talk about it and gather that data and give you a nice presentation that you can then take credit for in your organization by shipping it up. We're happy to have that happen too. So, all right, Val, is there anything else that we need to cover before we wrap up here?
I don't think we have any other questions, but y'all feel free to pop any in as they come up. But we'd love to hear from you for our next set of webinar topics. We're in the process of planning out our webinar schedule for the next 2 quarters, and it is super important that these webinars are most pertinent and beneficial to you. So drop it in, no filter. Feel free to DM us as well if you're more comfortable doing that.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, everyone.